The Messerschmitt's cannon fire tore through the tail section. Flight Lieutenant Thomas Archer felt the hurricane shudder, heard metal scream, watched the altimeter needle spin downward. 4,000 feet. 3,500. The German was right behind him, closing, firing again. Archer's wingman was already gone, black smoke trailing into the channel below. He had maybe 5 seconds before the next burst cut him in half. Every manual said keep the engine roaring. Every instructor said maintain power. Speed meant life. Speed meant escape. Archer reached forward and pulled the mixture control to idle cutoff. The Rolls-Royce Merlin engine coughed once, then went silent. The propeller windmilled uselessly. The Hurricane became a glider, falling through empty sky with no sound except wind rushing past the canopy. What happened in the next 40 seconds would be whispered about in RAF messes from Scotland to Gibraltar. And it started with a pilot who'd been told he thought too much, flew too carefully, and would never survive real combat. If you want more true stories of impossible moments from World War II, subscribe to the channel. It was September 1940. The Battle of Britain was in its killing phase. The Luftwaffe was throwing everything at southern England, and Fighter Command was bleeding pilots faster than training could replace them. Every day meant funerals. Every mission meant empty chairs in the mess. Thomas Archer had arrived at RF Tangmere 3 weeks earlier, 22 years old, pale, serious, with a degree in physics from Cambridge that no one cared about. The other pilots called him Professor. Not with affection, with irritation, because Archer asked questions. Strange questions. Questions like, what's the glide ratio of a Hurricane with a dead engine? And how long can a pilot track a target if the target makes no sound? The squadron leader, a Battle of France veteran named Caldwell, told him to stop overthinking and start killing Germans. Archer nodded politely, but he didn't stop thinking. He spent his evenings in the dispersal hut, reading accident reports and combat analyses. He studied every loss, every near miss, every improbable survival, and he noticed a pattern. Most pilots who were shot down in flames died because they stayed predictable. They dove, they turned, they tried to outrun pursuers using the same tactics everyone used. The Germans had seen it all. They knew the playbook. They positioned for the dive before it happened. They led the turn before it started. Predictability was death. But there was something else in the reports, something no one talked about. A handful of pilots had survived impossible situations by doing things that made no sense. One had inverted his Spitfire and hung there, -G, bleeding fuel, until his pursuer gave up and broke off. Another had chopped his throttle in the middle of a dive, forcing an overshoot. A third had feathered his prop and glided into clouds, while 2 109s searched for him below. They were statistical anomalies. Flukes. Luck. Everyone said so. Archer didn't think they were flukes. He thought they were data points. On the morning of September 15th, the squadron was scrambled at 0730 hours. Radar had picked up a massive formation coming across the channel. Bombers with fighter escort, heading for London. 12 Hurricanes climbed into a pale morning sky. Engine straining, pilots checking guns and oxygen. Archer was flying as Green 3, middle position in the second section. His aircraft was Hurricane Mk IP-3578, a tired machine with patched fabric on the wings and oil stains under the cowling. He had flown it only twice before. It pulled slightly left on takeoff, and the gun button on the stick was loose. But it flew. That was enough. They reached 18,000 feet and turned southeast. The controller's voice crackled through the headset. 60-plus bandits, Angels 20, heading 320. Engage at will. Caldwell's voice cut in, calm and hard. All sections, line astern. We're going through the bombers. Ignore the fighters if you can. Kill the bombers. Archer scanned the sky ahead. Then he saw them. A dark mass of aircraft, layered like a swarm. Dornier bombers in tight formation, maybe 40 of them. And above, circling, waiting, at least 30 BF 109s. The 109s were the killers. Fast, agile, deadly. They would dive on anyone who got separated. The Hurricanes went in. Caldwell led, diving toward the bomber formation from the side. Archer followed, throttle wide open. Gun sight centered on a Dornier's wing root. The sky erupted. Tracer fire from the bombers, green and white streams, crossing and arcing. A hurricane to Archer's left took hits and rolled away trailing smoke. Archer fired. 2-second burst. Saw strikes on the Dornier's fuselage. Then he was past, pulling up hard, trying to stay with the section. That's when the 109s came down. 3 of them, diving in a loose Vic formation. Archer saw them late. They were already firing. His wingman, a pilot named Ellis, broke hard right and disappeared into the chaos. Archer pulled left, but the lead 109 followed. Experienced. Precise. He stayed behind Archer, matching every turn, closing the distance. Archer heard cannon fire, felt impacts. The Hurricane bucked. A hole appeared in the left wing. Another in the fuselage, just behind the cockpit. He pushed the nose down, diving, trying to gain speed. The 109 followed effortlessly. It had an energy advantage. It had altitude. It had him. Archer pulled hard, trying a reversal. The Hurricane groaned, shuddering on the edge of a stall. The 109 just pulled inside his turn and fired again. More hits. The tail section. The rudder. Archer felt the controls go mushy. He looked at the altimeter. 4,000 feet. Diving fast. The 109 was 30 yards behind him. He had one choice. Bail out. Pull the canopy. Roll inverted, drop clear. Live to fly another day. But Archer had read the reports. He knew what happened to pilots who bailed out over the channel. Some were rescued. Most drowned. And even if he survived, the Luftwaffe would have another kill. Another data point in their favor. He thought about the anomalies. The pilots who had done the impossible. The ones who had survived by breaking every rule. And then he did something no one had ever done deliberately in combat. He reached forward and pulled the mixture control to idle cutoff. The engine died instantly. The Merlin's roar cut off like someone had thrown a switch. The propeller stopped driving and began windmilling, spinning freely in the slipstream. The Hurricane became silent except for the rush of wind. No engine noise. No vibration. Just the whistle of air over the wings. The effect was immediate and disorienting. The 109 pilot had been tracking Archer by sound and sight. The sound told him where Archer was, how fast he was going, whether he was accelerating or decelerating. Every fighter pilot used sound as much as vision. The engine's roar was part of the target signature. Now there was no roar, just silence. The 109 pilot must have thought Archer had been hit, that his engine had failed. He closed in for the kill, positioning for a final burst. But Archer wasn't tumbling, wasn't smoking. He was gliding, nose slightly down, perfectly controlled. Archer watched the airspeed indicator. It was dropping. 220 knots. 200, 180. The Hurricane's glide ratio was better than most fighters because of its thick wing. He could stay airborne for minutes if he managed it right. He adjusted the trim, keeping the nose at the optimal glide angle. The 109 closed to 50 yards. 40. The German pilot must have been confused now. Why wasn't Archer bailing? Why was he still flying straight? Was this a trap? Archer waited, watched the mirror mounted above the canopy. The 109 was directly behind him, slightly above, slowing to match Archer's speed. The German was cautious now, suspicious. Then Archer did the second thing no one expected. He dropped the flaps. The Hurricane's speed bled off instantly. The aircraft ballooned upward slightly, then settled into a steeper descent. Airspeed dropped to 140 knots. The Hurricane was barely flying, hanging on the edge of a stall, silent and slow. The 109 overshot. The German pilot had been going at least 250 knots, maybe more. He couldn't slow down fast enough. He flashed past Archer's right side, close enough that Archer could see the black Balkenkreuz on the fuselage. The pilot's helmeted head turning, looking back, realizing what had happened. Archer hit the starter. The Merlin coughed, caught, roared back to life. He shoved the throttle forward, retracted the flaps, and pulled the stick back. The Hurricane climbed, engine screaming, gaining speed. The 109 was ahead of him now. The German pilot was trying to pull up, trying to regain his energy advantage. But Archer had angles. For 3 seconds, maybe 4, he had a firing solution. He pressed the gun button. 8 Browning machine guns hammered. Tracer rounds walked up the 109's fuselage. Strikes on the tail, the wing root, the cockpit. The 109 snap-rolled left, trailing white smoke, glycol coolant streaming from a ruptured radiator. Archer didn't follow. He rolled right, dove toward the deck, and headed for home. His hands were shaking. His heart was slamming against his ribs. He could barely breathe. He had just killed a 109 by turning off his engine. The flight back to Tangmere took 12 minutes. Archer stayed low, under 500 feet, watching for bandits. His Hurricane was battered. Holes in the wings, holes in the tail. The rudder responding sluggishly. But it flew. He made it across the coast, saw the airfield ahead, dropped a gear, and landed. The ground crew was already running toward him before he shut down. They counted the damage. 23 bullet and cannon strikes. One of them, the crew chief, said, "How are you alive, sir?" Archer climbed out of the cockpit, legs unsteady. He said, "I turned the engine off." The crew chief stared at him. "You what?" "I shut down the engine. Then I restarted it." The crew chief looked at the other mechanics. They looked back. One of them said, "That's the maddest thing I've ever heard, sir." Archer said nothing. He walked toward the dispersal hut, still shaking, still breathing hard. Caldwell was waiting, arms crossed, watching him approach. Ellis didn't make it back. Caldwell said, "You're the only one from Green Section who did. What happened up there?" Archer told him. Every detail. The 109 on his tail. The decision to cut the engine. The silence. The overshoot. The restart. The kill. Caldwell listened without interrupting. When Archer finished, Caldwell was quiet for a long time. Then he said, "You killed your own engine. In combat. While someone was shooting at you." "Yes, sir. And if it hadn't restarted? Then I would have glided into the channel and bailed out, sir." Caldwell shook his head slowly. "That's either the stupidest thing I've ever heard, or the most brilliant. I'm not sure which. It worked, sir. This time. What if the 109 pilot hadn't overshot? What if he just hung back and waited for you to hit the water?" Archer adjusted his glasses. "Then I would have been dead anyway, sir. Diving wasn't working. Turning wasn't working. He had me. I needed to do something he didn't expect." Caldwell studied him. "You planned this. This wasn't improvisation. I read about engine failures in combat, sir. Pilots who glided to safety. I wanted to know if it could be weaponized." "Weaponized? You weaponized an engine failure?" "Yes, sir." Caldwell turned and looked out at the airfield. 2 more Hurricanes were landing, both trailing smoke. He said, "All right, Professor. Tomorrow morning, you're going to brief the squadron. Every detail. Because if this works, if this is repeatable, then we need to know about it. But if it's just luck, if you just got away with something insane, then I need to make sure no one else tries it and kills themselves." Archer nodded. "Yes, sir." That night, Archer sat in the dispersal hut and wrote everything down. The altitude when he cut the engine, the airspeed, the glide angle, the timing of the flap deployment, the restart procedure. He treated it like a physics problem. Cause and effect, variables and outcomes. Other pilots drifted in, heard what had happened, and gathered around. Some were skeptical. Some were intrigued. A pilot named Sutherland, a veteran with 6 kills, said, "You're saying you went silent, just glided, and the German lost track of you." Archer nodded. He knew where I was visually, but he lost the auditory cue. Fighter pilots track targets by sound as much as sight, especially in a stern chase. When the engine went silent, it disrupted his targeting loop. He had to rely only on visual tracking, which is harder at close range when you're also managing your own aircraft. Sutherland frowned. "And the overshoot? That was guaranteed." "No, it was probable. He was going fast. I was going slow. His closure rate was too high. He either had to overshoot or reduce speed dramatically. If he reduced speed, he'd lose his energy advantage. If he overshot, I'd get a reversal opportunity." Another pilot, younger, said, "What if he just shot you while you were gliding?" "Then I'd be dead. But I was dead anyway. This gave me a chance." The next morning, 12 pilots sat in the briefing room while Archer stood at the front with a chalkboard. Caldwell sat in the back, arms folded, watching. Archer drew diagrams, energy states, pursuit curves, glide ratios. The principle is acoustic disruption combined with energy manipulation, Archer said. In stern chase, the attacker uses both visual and auditory cues to track the target. Engine sound tells him speed, power setting, whether you're accelerating or decelerating. Remove that sound and you remove half his targeting information. He drew a simple diagram. 2 aircraft, one behind the other. If you cut the engine, you enter a glide. Your speed decreases rapidly. The attacker is still under power, so his closure rate increases dramatically. He has 3 options. First, reduce power and match your speed. Second, overshoot and reposition. Third, fire while closing rapidly. The third option is difficult because his aim is constantly changing. The first option costs him his energy advantage. The second option gives you a reversal window. Sutherland raised his hand. How long can you glide before you're too low to recover? Depends on starting altitude. At 4,000 feet, you have approximately 60 to 90 seconds of controlled glide before you're at 500 feet. That's your minimum restart altitude. Below that, you won't have time to recover if the engine fails to restart. Another pilot asked, "What's the restart procedure?" Archer walked them through it. Mixture rich. Throttle cracked. Magnetos on. Hit the starter. If it doesn't catch in 3 seconds, prime it and try again. He said, "The Merlin is reliable. It'll restart if you haven't been out of fuel or lost oil pressure. But you need to keep the restart time under 5 seconds. Every second you're gliding, you're losing altitude and options." A pilot in the back, a Scotsman named McLeod, said, "This only works if the German is directly behind you. What if he's at an angle?" Then you don't use this technique. This is for pure stern chases, where you're out of options. If he has an angular advantage, you maneuver normally. Caldwell stood up. "All right. This afternoon, we test it. Archer, you'll fly defensive. Sutherland, you're the attacker. We'll see if this is repeatable or if it was a one-time fluke. Everyone else, stay clear and observe." At 1,400 hours, Archer and Sutherland took off. They climbed to 8,000 feet over the coast. The radio crackled. Sutherland's voice. "All right, Professor. I'm coming in from your 6. Don't make it easy." Archer banked left, scanning his mirror. He saw Sutherland's Hurricane behind him, maybe 600 yards back, closing. He pushed the throttle forward in Dove, gaining speed. Sutherland followed, cutting the angle, closing the distance. At 500 yards, Archer pulled up into a climb. Sutherland anticipated it, stayed with him. At 300 yards, Archer broke right. Sutherland pulled inside his turn. Good pilot. Experienced. He was doing everything correctly. At 200 yards, Archer was out of options. In real combat, he'd be taking hits now. He reached forward and pulled the mixture control to idle cutoff. The Merlin died. Silence flooded the cockpit. The Hurricane's nose dropped slightly as the aircraft transitioned to a glide. Archer trimmed it, stabilized at 160 knots, descending at 800 feet per minute. Behind him, Sutherland hesitated. Archer couldn't see it, but he knew what was happening. Sutherland was closing rapidly now, trying to match the sudden speed loss, realizing the target had gone quiet. Archer counted. 1,001. 1,002. At 3 seconds, he dropped the flaps. The Hurricane ballooned, slowed to 130 knots. Sutherland's voice burst over the radio. "Bloody hell." Archer hit the starter. The Merlin coughed, caught, roared. He shoved the throttle forward and pulled into a hard climbing turn. Sutherland was ahead of him now, slightly below, trying to pull up. Archer rolled inverted, pulled through, and came out on Sutherland's tail. "Guns, guns, guns," Archer said calmly into the radio. Sutherland laughed. "Okay, you mad bastard. That actually works." They landed 20 minutes later. Caldwell was waiting with 4 other pilots. Sutherland climbed out first, shaking his head. He disappeared. Not visually, but acoustically. I knew where he was, but my brain kept expecting the engine sound. When it wasn't there, I second-guessed myself. and then he slowed so suddenly I couldn't compensate in time. Caldwell looked at Archer. How repeatable is this? If the conditions are right, vary. You need altitude, you need a stern chase, and you need an attacker who's committed to the pursuit. It won't work every time, but when it works, it's decisive. Over the next week, 6 pilots practiced the technique. For made it work, 2 nearly crashed when their engines didn't restart immediately. Caldwell filed a report with Group Headquarters, describing the maneuver as a last-resort defensive tactic utilizing engine shutdown to induce acoustic disruption and attacker overshoot. The report reached Air Vice Marshal Park, commander of 11 Group. Park was a tactician, always looking for small advantages that could save pilots. He authorized limited dissemination of the technique to squadron commanders, with strict caveats. Only experienced pilots. Only when conventional maneuvers had failed. Only above 3,000 feet. By October, the technique had a name. Some called it the silent drop. Others called it Archer's Gambit. A few veteran pilots called it the suicide glide and refused to try it. But the younger pilots, the ones who were still learning, still adapting, they paid attention. In late October, a pilot from 249 Squadron used the technique over Kent. He was being chased by 2 109s, out of ammunition, engine overheating. He shut down, glided, restarted, and slipped into a cloud bank while the 109s searched below him. He made it home. When his squadron commander asked how he survived, he said, "I remembered what Archer did. I went silent." In November, a Polish pilot from 303 Squadron used it over the Thames estuary. He was damaged, losing fuel, 109 on his tail. He killed the engine, dropped flaps, forced an overshoot, restarted, and made it back to Nordholt on fumes. He landed, climbed out, and told his ground crew. The English pilot, the one who stops his engine, he is a genius or insane. Maybe both. Archer flew through the winter of 1940 and into 1941. He was promoted to flight lieutenant in January. He scored 4 more kills, none of them using the silent technique. He didn't need to. The reputation was enough. German pilots had heard about the RAF pilot who shut down his engine in combat. They became more cautious in stern chases, more hesitant, and hesitation in air combat was fatal. In March 1941, Archer was posted to the Central Flying School as an instructor. He spent 6 months teaching advanced tactics to new pilots. He emphasized situational awareness, energy management, and unconventional thinking. He told them, "The enemy has a playbook. If you follow your playbook, and they follow theirs, the fight is predictable. Predictable fights are won by whoever has the advantage at the start. If you don't have the advantage, you have to break the pattern." In September 1941, he was sent to the Middle East. He flew Hurricanes in North Africa, covering the Western Desert Campaign. He flew 180 combat missions, scored 9 more kills, and was awarded the Distinguished Flying Cross. The citation noted his exceptional tactical innovation and leadership under fire. He never used the silent technique again. He never needed to, but other pilots did. Throughout 1942 and 1943, scattered reports came in from various theaters. A pilot in Malta, a pilot in Burma, a pilot over Sicily. Each had used some variation of the engine shutdown maneuver to escape or reverse a hopeless situation. Not all of them survived, but some did. And those who did usually credited a pilot named Archer, who'd proven that silence could be a weapon. After the war, Archer returned to Cambridge. He completed his doctorate in aeronautical engineering. His dissertation was titled Acoustic Signatures in Air Combat, a study of non-visual tracking methods. It was dry, academic, full of equations and wind tunnel data, but buried in Chapter 7 was a section on deliberate signature disruption as a defensive tactic. He didn't mention his own combat experience. He didn't need to. Every fighter pilot who read it knew exactly what he was talking about. In 1952, the RAF published a comprehensive review of Battle of Britain tactics. There was a subsection on unconventional defensive maneuvers. The silent technique was included, with detailed analysis and recommendations. The report concluded, While high risk, the deliberate engine shutdown to induce attacker overshoot proved tactically viable in limited circumstances. Credited to F.L. Thomas Archer, the technique demonstrates the value of challenging established doctrine when facing adaptive adversaries. The interviewer asked, "Were you afraid when you shut down your engine that first time?" Archer thought for a moment. "I was more afraid of being predictable. Fear of the enemy is natural, but fear of being a statistic, of dying the same way everyone else died, that bothered me more. I wanted my death, if it came, to at least teach something useful." And the silence, what did that feel like? Peaceful, for about 3 seconds, then terrifying when I realized I'd actually done it, and now had to make it work. Do you think it should be taught to pilots today? No. Modern aircraft are different. Jet engines don't restart the way pistons do. But the principle is still valid. Disruption, unpredictability, making the enemy doubt his assumptions. That's timeless. Archer died in 1989, age 71. His obituary in The Guardian mentioned his academic career, his war service, and his DFC. It included one line. During the Battle of Britain, Archer pioneered an unconventional defensive tactic that involved shutting down his aircraft engine in combat, a maneuver that was later adopted by other pilots facing similar circumstances. Most readers probably thought it was a typo. Shutting down your engine in combat? That made no sense. But the pilots knew. The ones who had studied the history, who had read the after-action reports, who understood that survival sometimes required madness that looked like logic after the fact. They knew that on a September morning in 1940, a 22-year-old pilot with a physics degree had turned off his engine while a Messerschmitt was shooting at him, had glided in silence through hostile sky, and had proven that the absence of sound could be as powerful as the roar of guns. The technique itself became obsolete with the jet age, but the lesson didn't. In air forces around the world, instructors still teach the principle. Do what the enemy doesn't expect. Break the pattern. Use the enemy's assumptions against him. And sometimes, the most powerful thing you can do is stop doing what you're supposed to do. Archer's Hurricane, P-3578, survived the war. It was repaired after that September mission, flew for another 2 years, then was retired and scrapped. But a piece of the fuselage was saved, a small section with 3 cannon strike holes clustered near the tail. It's now in the Imperial War Museum, part of an exhibit on Battle of Britain tactics. The placard next to it reads, Hurricane MKI, flown by F.L. Thomas Archer, who developed the silent drop defensive maneuver. This section shows damage sustained during the combat, in which the technique was first employed. Visitors walk past it every day. Most don't stop. It's just another piece of damaged aircraft in a museum full of them. But occasionally, a pilot stops, looks at the holes, reads the placard, and understands what it meant to shut down your engine while someone was trying to kill you. To trust physics and probability over instinct. To choose silence over noise, stillness over speed, thought over panic. That's Archer's real legacy. Not the technique itself, but the mindset behind it. The willingness to question doctrine when doctrine was failing. The courage to test an idea when the penalty for being wrong was death. The understanding that survival wasn't about following the rules better than the enemy. It was about rewriting the rules in real time. If you enjoy real World War II stories, where skill and courage change history, subscribe for more. And the next time you're in a situation that seems impossible, where every option looks like failure, ask yourself, what would happen if you stopped doing what everyone expects and did the one thing no one would predict? Sometimes the answer is silence.